Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly, and it's episode 66 with thriller writer Kate Medina joining us for today's interview. Kate is a fascinating guest, and she's got loads to say about why and how she writes, her characters, inspiration, and her journey to publication. We've also got another review in Book Bloggers Corner from regular blogger bibliomaniac Catherine Sunderland. Before we get to all that, I wanted to let you know how my own writing has been going and to ask you a question that's been playing on my mind. This week I've been ploughing on with my rewrites for Safe Hands, my debut novel about an over-the-hill safecracker forced out of retirement for the sake of his dying wife and a son that hates his guts. By the way, I think it's important to mention that when I keep saying safecracker and most people think of heavy drilling machinery or a man with a stethoscope pressed up to the door of a safe, my main character doesn't do either of those things. He's got the almost superhuman ability to sense the tiny movements of the locking mechanisms in traditional mechanical safes. Now, in case you think that that's stretching credibility a little bit too far and I'm straying into the realms of the supernatural, you should Google Jeff Sitar, who has been world champion safecracker on numerous occasions, and you can even find videos of him performing this amazing feat online. He actually does it for a living, legally, I might add, and it was great for my research being able to see how he goes about doing it, so I'd recommend that you check that out because it's really interesting stuff. Anyway, rewriting and editing aside, there's been something else on my mind, and that's genre. As I inch towards the release of my first book, I need to start thinking about brand. I know we hate that word, but who I think my writing might appeal to. And at the moment, if you head over to WayneKellyWrites.com, the tagline is crime fiction, blogs and more, which is pretty accurate, but the truth is I write across multiple genres. I've got another completed first draft that I guess you could describe as a comic urban fantasy. Think poor man's Douglas Adams, and you're probably getting quite close. As well as loads of short stories that cover everything from horror to comedy to another crime story about a bank robbing robot. So whilst I'm already outlining the follow-up to my current crime novel and a short story prequel to that as well, do I run the danger of annoying potential readers if in a couple of books' time I bring out an urban fantasy? Or am I just fretting about nothing when the whole thing can be solved by just losing the crime fiction bit in the tagline and maybe just describing myself as a writer? It doesn't seem to matter for other authors that I admire, people like Chuck Wendig, who just puts himself out there as a genre writer. So what are your thoughts on genre and how writers brand themselves? Would it bother you if you signed up for my mailing list, for example, and I sent you a free short story that was a comedy about a robot rather than a gritty crime tale? Maybe you're a multi-genre author yourself and you've got some advice for me. So if that's the case, then let me know at joinedupwriting.co.uk, or you can tweet me at JUPodcast, or drop over to my own blog at WayneKellyWrites.com and let me know what you think. Right, that's quite enough moaning for 1 week, so on with the show and today's guest, Kate Medina. So before turning to writing full-time, Kate spent 5 years in the Territorial Army. She also worked in publishing as managing editor, land-based weapon systems at Jane's Information Group, where she was responsible for providing information on small arms, armour, artillery, landmines, etc., to global militaries. She has an MA in creative writing from Bath University, and her debut novel, White Crocodile, set in the landmine fields of Cambodia, received widespread critical acclaim, as did Fire Damage and Scared to Death, the first and second books in the Dr. Jessie Flynn Clinical Psychologist series. She's travelled extensively, and she was really interesting to talk to. So, hi Kate, thanks a million for coming on Joined Up Writing Podcast. How's things?
Very good, thank you, Wayne, and it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem, that's fine. So, I wanted to just start off by, you've had such an interesting life, both in writing but away from writing, before you started writing, from doing a psychology degree to being an officer in the Territorial Army and travelling all over the place, like places like Cambodia and places like that. So I just wondered if you could just start by telling us a little bit about that for people that don't know, and sort of what led you into writing fiction eventually, how you got into that.
Okay. Well, yes, no, as you say, I did a first degree in psychology, and I picked that because, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I suppose, and my mum said, oh, well, you like people, you're good with people and you're interested in people, so I picked psychology as a degree, and I didn't really use it that much until actually recently, and now I'm writing about a psychologist in my series, which starts with Fire Damage and then Scared to Death. The second in the series came out in May. So I'm now using everything I learned in my psychology degree absolutely hugely in my writing, having not used it at all really for the sort of 20 years since I did my degree. Mm-hmm. But it was while I was at university that I joined the Territorial Army. I actually took a year off before I went to university, and I travelled around the world. And I met somebody who was in the Territorial Army when I was travelling, and he said, you've got to join the Army, you're exactly the right personality, you'll really, really love it. Mm-hmm. And I had no history in the Army, my family has no history, so so I think if I hadn't met him, it wouldn't have occurred to me to join the Territorial Army. So when I got to university, I signed up first to the university wing, which is called the Officers Training Corps, and I won sort of Best Woman Officer Cadet after a couple of years, and then I was sent to Sandhurst to be commissioned as an officer. So I became a second lieutenant, and then I was a platoon commander at the university wing, and then when I left university, I joined the Royal Engineers, and I became a troop commander in the Royal Engineers. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of then led me to, a few years later, I joined a company called Jane's Information Group, which is a publisher of defence intelligence information. So they basically publish information on every single weapon in the world, mm-hmm. Really, really detailed information. And they kind of say they do that to kind of create a level playing field between, everyone in the world, so everyone knows exactly what everyone else has got, effectively.
Sure, yeah.
And I was head of land-based weapons, so I was responsible for every weapon that operates on land, and one of the things that we didn't cover was landmines, and landmines is the most prolific weapon of war. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, it's something, and obviously a massive humanitarian, creates massive humanitarian crises. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, it's something we need to cover. So I went to Cambodia, and I spent a month there working with mine clearers to kind of find out what information they needed. Because I wanted it to be more practical. I wanted it to be a book that could actually help mine clearers clear mines much more efficiently and effectively in the field. Mm-hmm. And it was there that, that's my first novel, White Crocodile, was set in Cambodia, and kind of, sort of based on my experiences there. But I wanted to write it because Cambodia is a terrible, sort of heartbreaking place off the tourist trail. And there's sort of 6 million landmines there. So a lot of people, it has more amputees in the world than any other country per head of population. Mm-hmm. And because there's no social security, and if you get injured by a landmine, people literally just starve. Yeah. And also what's worse is that Cambodians believe that if you've lost part of your body, you've also lost a part of your brain. And so that amputees cannot be allowed to work in any intellectual occupation. So obviously they can't do anything physical, and then they can't do anything intellectual. So it's a sort of double whammy, effectively. Mm.
So that obviously affected you greatly.
Yes, it did. And again, that was sort of about 15 years ago. So actually probably longer than that now. And it never occurred to me to become a writer at the time. My background, after I did my psychology degree, I'm quite analytical. So I then, obviously worked for Jane's, and then I went on to be a strategy consultant and did a business master's in business and was very businessy for quite a long time. But I kept my Cambodia experience in my mind, and I kept thinking, I'd love to write a novel set in Cambodia that kind of explores and exposes the kind of exploitation that goes on in a country that has been made so devastatingly poor, effectively by landmines, and how when a population is so poor that they become incredibly easy to exploit. Mm-hmm. And so White Crocodile is much more about exploitation. That it's not about landmines. It's kind of set in landmines as a setting, mm-hmm. but it's actually about the sort of exploitation of the developing world by people from the developed world. That's the kind of central theme.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of formed the backdrop. But before that bit of, well, for want of a better description, that non-fiction writing that you were doing as part of your job and all that kind of thing. Was creative writing something that you'd done when you were younger, or something that appealed to you? I'm guessing you were an avid reader.
Yes, no, I've always loved reading. So I grew up on, my best friend and I used to have sleepovers, and we'd read Famous Five novels. We were obviously not very exciting. We never used to do anything naughty on our sleepovers. We'd just read Famous Five novels. So I grew up on Famous Five, and actually Biggles was another thing I loved. So I think I probably always quite liked the army because of Biggles. Mm-hmm. And then obviously things like Lord of the Flies, all those kinds of, To Kill a Mockingbird. There's so many sort of great novels. Yes, so I used to read all the time. And I used to love to write. I used to love to write in English at school, but I never got brilliant marks, I suppose. I don't know, it wasn't. I think that's the problem with school writing. They probably look for very different things than actual, professional writers deliver. So no, I've always loved to read, and I've always loved to read sort of thrillery, crimey type of things. Mm-hmm. And I've always enjoyed writing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about the school system. I found that myself. In terms of creative writing, particularly, I was lucky. I had one particular teacher for a certain amount of my time at school, and he was really, really enthusiastic and really, really encouraging. And he was obviously a big fan of creative writing himself, and he would set you assignments that were in that that field. But for a lot of the rest of the time, it was all about punctuation, spelling, and the technicalities of it, and not really anything else, which is a shame, really.
It is a shame. I've got 3 children now. My daughters are 12 and 10, mm-hmm. and they're obviously doing lots of writing, and it's all about. My younger one is doing the 11 plus soon, and it's all about. When you're writing this essay, you are looking to tick boxes, absolutely, to get marks, and it's such a shame that's what. That's what I have to teach her, that you're doing this essay to tick box. You must put a metaphor in, you must put speech in, you must tick all these boxes. Yeah. And I think that does take the enjoyment and the creativity out of it.
Especially like the readability, because even with an essay, the readability of it should be key, you would think.
Yes, it's funny, and actually, children, as you say, the writing you learn at school is very, very different to how people write books. At school you sort of cram in tons of adjectives and adverbs and description, all this, and metaphors and similes. And if you put all those into a novel, it just sounds really, really overwritten. Mm-hmm. And actually, kind of what I learned when I started writing was actually you need to write in quite a pared back, simplistic style, mm-hmm. rather than being overly flowery. Because I think people kind of fill in, they can use their imagination more if you're not flowery. I think you become too flowery, it just starts feeling kind of cliched and,
I agree. Well, there's the old saying, the writer should get out of the way of the story in some ways, because I think as soon as you start noticing the writer or the narrator, you're dead in the water, really.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you want to. Yes, as soon as a sentence screams out at you, then you think, actually, hold on a second.
This is writing. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it should be kind of invisible. And so with that, with your debut book with White Crocodile, was that the first novel that you completed, or was it the first novel that you got published? And I often make that distinction when I chat to guests, because it's often not. Well, a lot of the time it's not. That often the case, they might be the second or the third novel that they completed or finished, but that's not necessarily the first one that gets published. What was that like that for you, or was that the first novel?
No, it was my first novel. So it was the first one I wrote and the first one I had published. But that wasn't to say the process was easy. So I basically, I had the idea for White Crocodile, and then I worked as a strategy consultant, which is quite a tough job, and you travel the whole time. And I left that, and I thought I just want to do something completely different, and I want to write that novel that I've been thinking about, since I was in Cambodia, sort of 10 years before. So I actually did a master's degree in creative writing at Bath Spa University to kind of learn how to write. And I remember I sent an excerpt that you have to send your first 3 chapters in. So I sent the first 3 chapters of the first, draft of White Crocodile, and they called me for interview. And I remember the 2 professors said, your writing is terrible, but we absolutely love your idea. And they said, why don't you just go away and write for a year and then come back and apply next year? And I said, look, I know my writing's terrible because I read books and then I read my stuff, and I said, but I don't understand what I'm doing wrong, so there's no point me going writing rubbish for a year and then coming back. So you might as well let me, I want to join this course to learn how to write. So, and I thought they'd rejected me, but they didn't. They let me on, and I learned a huge amount from that course, and I wrote the first draft of White Crocodile on that course, but it was still 7 years until it got published. Not that I wasn't writing it continually for 7 years. I went back to work, put it away, and then I got it out again. But it's a process. It's very hard to get published. It's hard. It's very hard to get published, your first one.
It is, I agree, and I think it's it's very kind of honest of you to kind of admit. I mean, a lot of writers, even if it's just privately, will say where they'll look. I mean, I look back on things that I wrote like 2 years ago, and I'll say, that was awful. And I feel like I've improved since then. And I think that is the thing with writing. I think regardless of how many books you've written or anything else, you do, if you're constantly doing it and you're constantly willing to learn, you do hone your craft over a period of time, don't you?
No, I really think you do. And I think some people have the opinion, because there's a big debate about these sort of creative writing courses. A lot of people say, you can't teach people to write. And I actually just don't agree with that. And my publisher, I'm published by HarperCollins, and my editor always says, well, you're a natural writer. Your writing is so natural. And I said, I'm really not a natural writer. I've worked very hard to become what appears to be a natural writer. And I think people can learn anything. I think if you want to learn something, you can. If you're prepared to work hard enough, I think you'll learn to write. I think you can learn to do anything.
I agree. Well, I read, you mentioned that it was quite a difficult process. I did read another part of an interview that you did for somebody else, and you talked specifically about it was quite a painful process for you in terms of the rewrite on White Crocodile. And in this particular interview, the specific thing you were talking about was on professional advice from your agent, and you sort of talked about, almost having to sort of throw a third of it away and rewrite it. To tell me a little bit about that. Obviously, why it was difficult, and the type. Give us a kind of flavour of the types of kind of suggestions that were made, or the types of problems that you had with it, and what you learned from it.
Well, as I said before, White Crocodile. I wanted to write White Crocodile because I wanted to use a kind of thriller format to communicate what I found to be incredibly sort of deeply, distressing, exploitative world, that happens in Cambodia, and particularly the people who always get exploited the most in those kinds of countries are the women, the weak, but the women and the children. And so I wanted to use, but I didn't want to write a factual book because I thought actually people love crime novels, and I'd be able to get my message, out to more people if I write in the format of crime novel. But what my agent said, he said, I totally see what you're trying to do, and the story's great, but there's just not enough. There's not enough thrill in it. It's too factual, and there's not enough thrill. So he basically said, classic advice, said you need to go away and kill more people. Was exactly what he said. He said, you need to kill more people, and you need to put more subplots in and make it more twisty and make it more thrillery. So I basically went away for, I think, about another 3 months, and I rewrote. And I read a lot, actually. I read a lot of thriller. So, for example, Jon Nesbo, I think, is fantastic. His books, The Snowman and The Leopard, I love. So I read a couple of his books and a few, quite big, sort of hefty, really complex crime novels. And then I read mine again. And I thought, actually, I know exactly what I've done wrong. And so I basically put lots more subplots and killed everybody, and then sent it back to my agent. And he said it's quite interesting with new potential authors. He said I've sent quite a few away, and he said probably 80% come back and they haven't been able to do what I've instructed them to do. He said, but you've got it. You've kind of cracked it. But he said, but you've killed everybody. And I said, well, you told me. And he said, I don't want that person to die, that child to die. So I then had to go and resurrect a couple of people.
You took it a little bit too literally.
I did take it very, very literally, yes.
It was just a massacre.
It was a complete massacre, yeah. No one came out alive. It's like a real Bonnie and Clyde, but... So I resurrected a couple of people, and then he sent it off. And then once I'd rewritten it, once I understood that it had been too factual and rewrote it, it then got published very, very quickly. The process just happened very, very quickly after that. That's
great.
Great.
Yeah, and then tell us a little bit more about your series that you write now. Obviously, you just mentioned your latest book, Scared to Death, which features Dr. Jessie Flynn, I believe.
Yes.
And you started off with fire damage. So tell us a little bit about how that came about, and when you kind of realised that you might be writing a series, or did you set out to write a series right from the get-go?
Yes, I did set out to write a series because I think crime readers love series, and I, as a reader, love series. I loved sort of getting to know a character and then sort of following them, following their journey effectively. And I think a lot of crime readers do like series. So I wanted to write a series, and I also wanted to, sort of put I'd written a standalone, and I wanted to sort of challenge myself to write a series. And for me, it just seemed very obvious to write about a psychologist because I thought, I've got this psychology degree, and in psychology, crime is about psychology. It's about, criminals have a warped psychology, and that is effectively psychology is fundamental to crime. So, and I didn't want to write about a detective. I wanted to do something slightly different. I thought, I have this knowledge of psychology. I might as well use it to create a sort of interesting character. And then I thought also, I've got this knowledge of the army, and so I thought army psychologist. I think that'd be a great, interesting series, and also a bit different. And so that's how I came up with her character. Her character for the series. And I think it works really well. I think it's good. It's interesting to write about psychologists, and it really allows me to kind of explore the nature of criminality, I suppose, because she's looking at it from a psychologist's perspective and looking at sort of warped minds, effectively, and trying to understand people's minds. And I think that that's quite an interesting angle to take.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about Scared to Death. So give us a bit of a flavour of what that's about and how the story sort of formed.
Well, Scared to Death is basically about. It starts with a baby is abandoned in the middle of the night at a hospital in Surrey, and the detective. So there's also a detective who works for Surrey and Sussex Major Crimes, Detective Inspector Bobby Simmons, Marilyn Simmons. He's called Marilyn as a nickname after Marilyn Manson because he has one blue and one brown eye. So the sort of main characters are Dr. Jessie Flynn, who's a psychologist who works for the army. Bobby Marilyn Simmons is Detective Inspector who works for Surrey and Sussex Major Crimes, and then Captain Ben Callan, who is a military policeman, and sort of Jessie's love interest at this, by Scared to Death. So basically, this baby is abandoned in the middle of the night at the hospital, and Marilyn suspects that the baby's father is planning to take his own life following the violent suicide of his oldest son a year earlier. And the baby's been abandoned, the father's disappeared, and the race is on to find him. And then in a separate strand, Ben Callan, the military policeman, is investigating a suspicious death of a 16-year-old on an army base. This 16-year-old's been stabbed in the neck and abandoned in these woods on an army base. But Ben Callan realises that someone actually held him up and tried to save his life, but who did that and why aren't they coming forward? And then Jessie is called in to consult as a psychologist on both those cases, and she starts seeing connections between the two, between this abandoned baby and the father who's disappeared, and this boy who's been stabbed in the neck. And then she's also counselling a third traumatised young man, and the cases all start linking together.
Brilliant. Sounds really, really good. And when you obviously you've taken on this idea of writing a series, as you say, was something that you were really keen to do. And obviously you're 2 books in terms of published. Have you got presumably have you started on the next one?
I nearly finished the next one.
I thought you might say that.
Yeah. My deadline is actually a week on Friday, so I'm kind of up against it. So it's called Two Little Girls, the next one, and it's about the murder of two little girls, 2 years apart. So yes, I've nearly finished it, and I think the blurb might actually be up on Amazon. The back cover blurb already. Yeah. And my publisher HarperCollins are designing the cover, so they said they'll send that to me in a couple of weeks to have a look at. So yeah, so it's moving. So number 3 in the series, and the Jessie Flynn series, is sort of coming to life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I was going to ask you about that is, so when you're writing a series, and obviously you've agreed to deliver the next instalment by a certain date, you mentioned your deadline there. Do you find that you have other stories or book ideas sort of clamouring for attention, sort of demanding to be written, and how do you cope with that? I mean, are you quite disciplined? Do you store them for another time, or how do you feel about that?
I'm quite a disciplined character. I think maybe my sort of military background and stuff has made me disciplined, or maybe I was always disciplined and that's why I went into the military. But I am disciplined, and writing, it's a job, and I've got 3 young children, so I sit down when I drop them off at school and I write all day till I pick them up, and I often work in the evenings just because I don't have a nanny or anything, so holidays I have to spend with them. So and I've got a book a year contract, so writing a book a year is quite hard when you take all the holidays and
sure, yeah,
millions of weeks holidays out. But no, I have a couple of other ideas. I want to write a series of children's sort of thriller that I've got an idea for, slightly supernatural, thrillery type books, and I've got an idea for that. And I also want to write a sort of quite a grim serial killer book, and I've got a very good idea for that, but I don't think that quite fits in the Jessie Flynn series, so I'd like to write that as a standalone. But the problem is I need to keep writing Jessie Flynn, so I need to try and fit those other ideas around the main Jessie Flynn books.
So you are quite disciplined, because a lot of writers, and I count myself in this, often it's the old classic thing of the sexy new idea off to the side. When you're in the middle of your work in progress, it's always the new idea that seems more appealing, isn't it? That's on the periphery, but you manage to not get tempted.
Well, it's very tempting. I'm really quite taken by my serial killer idea, and I really want, because I've never actually written about a serial killer, and I really want to. But the problem is, I've got a contract, and when readers start getting into a series, they want the next instalment. I'm reading some of my Amazon reviews saying can't wait for the next one. So you kind of need to kind of deliver that. Though, to be fair, my editor always says you are the only author of mine who ever meets their deadlines.
There's a theme here. The military and the discipline. You sort of you fit in the stereotypes nicely.
I do. I'm very unexciting and unimaginative, I'm afraid.
Well, I don't know about that, given the life experience and things that you've got. But no, it's good. It's impressive to hear. So. You mentioned there obviously your kind of process and how you go about it in terms of you sit down at certain times and you kind of make sure you do it. But in general terms of how you approach writing a novel, do you have a set process in terms of taking it from that initial idea to how you develop the idea and then how you get down to the actual writing? Have you kind of, over the period of you've obviously just finishing your fourth book,
yes.
Your fourth book. Have you developed a process over that period of time?
Yes, I spend a lot of time plotting. So I actually plot in quite a basic way, but I stick loads of pieces of paper together till I have this sort of huge, half room sized piece of white paper on the floor, and then I work out all the main plot and all the different subplot strands, and I literally plot out each scene on a post-it note, and then I stick the post-it notes on this huge piece of paper. So I literally have chapter 1, scene 2, chapter 2, plotted out on these post-it notes, and that often takes 2 or 3 months. So I'll spend 2 or 3 months really thinking about the plot and creating the plot and the characters and making it very complex before I start writing a word. And I won't start writing till I kind of got the whole plot worked out in my head. Whereas I think a lot of writers just start writing and see where it goes. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't do. I think I would feel way too insecure to do that. So I like to have a plan, I'm afraid.
Well, that's like, well, yeah, but I mean, in a way, you are sort of doing that without starting the actual writing. But in a way, the fact that you spend so much time thinking about it, you could argue that you're kind of writing it in your head, really.
Yes. No, well, that's right. I am writing in my head, and then when I write the actual, because I think a lot of writers write a first draft and throw 80% of it away and then write another, and I would hate to do that. Mm-hmm. It kills me to throw anything away. So I do all my throwing away, I think, in my plotting stage, mm-hmm. and then when I write the first draft, it's actually usually quite a good first draft, and then I'll do a couple more drafts, but it won't change that much. The drafts will be sorting a bit of the plot out and just making the writing better, and but I won't throw loads away, because mm-hmm. I've kind of been through that process in the plotting stage, I think.
Do you ever find that your characters take you somewhere unexpected whilst you're actually writing? Do they ever derail your carefully detailed plans?
Best laid plans.
Best laid plans, yeah.
Yes, but virtually every book they do, actually. And then it's horrifying for me. So both Fire Damage and Scared to Death, I'd done my plot, and about halfway through the characters did something I hadn't expected, and so I then go back and replot. But then I will go back and kind of replot. I won't just keep writing and see where, I'll go with the characters, but I'll go with what they've done and then kind of redo the plot based on what they've done. And if that happens more than once or more than a few times in the book, I'll kind of go back and keep replotting. Mm-hmm. But the characters do, because it's weird, the characters do take on a life of their own. They do become real people. Mm-hmm. And the way I write, I tend to, I think I do tend to be sort of in their world. I'm kind of, when I'm writing, I'm kind of in the scene with them. I imagine myself kind of there rather than standing on the outside looking in.
Okay, that's the perfect place to take a quick break and grab a review in this week's Book Bloggers Corner. Today, Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac, is reviewing Susie Holliday's The Deaths of December.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
Today I'm going to talk about The Deaths of December by Susie Holliday. This is the perfect Christmas murder story and a really great police procedural. It's hopefully going to be under everybody's Christmas tree this year because it's such a fantastic book. I think Holliday has struck red, silver, green and gold with this new standalone crime thriller. The story is about an advent calendar that arrives at the police station, and as DC Becky Green starts opening its doors, she realises it's no ordinary advent calendar, nor sadly is it a joke. Behind every door is a photo of a crime scene. This is an advent calendar from a serial killer, an advent calendar with 4 more doors left, which means there are 4 more murders. DC Becky Green and DS Eddie Carmine have to catch the killer in time. I just think this is a genius idea for a novel, and as soon as I heard about the concept for this murder story, I was hooked and desperate to read it. I've read and loved Holliday's other Banktown trilogy, and I'm a huge admirer of her writing style, so there was no doubt in my mind that this festive novel would be as deadly and as compelling as her other books. The book is divided up into days, so we start on Friday, or 9 More Sleeps as it's subtitled. I like the use of sleeps here, as it's loaded with suggestions of excitement and a childlike countdown to a special celebration, but it also suggests death. I like the juxtaposition of something so childlike and naive being used in a much more sinister context. And it also immediately creates a sense of threat and tension and the idea of the ticking clock and the race against time to solve the crime. The chapters are narrated by Becky, Carly, Eddie and the photographer. The latter is the only one which uses the first person. The photographer is anonymous, but it's not long before we realise his role in the story. The first-person narrative is used effectively to create a more intimate voice and emphasise a greater sense of unease. It's unsettling and intriguing. The chapters alternate between these four voices, and it's impossible to stop reading as you're so keen to link the narratives together and always tempted to read on and find out the next part of the story. And also, with several different narrative viewpoints, Holiday is also able to add depth and several plot lines that string themselves across the page like contrasting ribbons of tinsel adorning a Christmas tree. As two of the voices of the detectives investigating the case, there is a perfect balance between the police procedural storyline and the more emotional or psychological storyline that's revealed through the photographer and Carly. Although this is a detective fiction novel, Holiday has definitely added plenty of grey, or red and green, into this story, and the voice of the photographer is a fascinating device for adding further psychological complication to the plot. This is a superb police procedural. It's faultless and fluent in its execution of story, plot, action and resolution. It's well researched, it's exciting, dramatic and well paced. I think the thing I enjoyed most was its readability, the fluidity and the ease and effortlessness of the writing and the dialogue. I lost all sense of time when I was reading this book and enjoyed indulging in such a clever, well-designed detective investigation. It's the perfect read for Christmas and will be a brilliant book to read over the festive season. It also has a fantastic ending, like a really fantastic ending. So my recommendation would be The Deaths of December, definitely a book to read this Christmas and should be waiting under the tree of any crime fiction fans this year, however many sleeps that must be.
Book Bloggers Corner.
There you go, that was a review of The Deaths of December by Susie Holiday by Catherine over at bibliomaniacuk.blogspot.co.uk, and I'll put a link to all of that in the show notes. So let's get back to my chat with Kate Medina, where I talked to Kate about dealing with some of the pressure that can arise from reader expectation as you write more books in a series. I spoke to another author about this recently, and they talked about after they'd written the first book and it was quite successful, and they kind of met people and they would tell them, I love this book, when you write the next one or whatever, and they actually struggled with it initially with the pressure of that. Is that something that you've struggled with, or how has that affected you, and has it changed the way that you think about writing?
No, I don't think so. I think it's very nice. I think that the odd thing about writing is that you're kind of sitting on your own. I mean, you literally the process. I kind of send a one-page proposal, synopsis to my editor at HarperCollins, and she says, yes, I like this book. I don't like this. Usually says, yes, I really like that idea. And then you literally have no input for a year. You spend a year kind of creating this thing, and you think, you hope it's fantastic, but it's quite odd sitting on your own at a desk creating something. And I kind of think, and then when I go to HarperCollins' office, I think, wow, there's a whole machine behind my book. And I think it's lovely getting feedback from readers, because you think, well, that's why you're doing it. And, I think sometimes it's hard to believe when you're sitting writing that actually thousands of people are going to read what you've written. But even when I've had a number of books published, it's quite an odd job like that. I think because it's quite solitary, and then you realise actually what you're creating, thousands of people are going to read it. So I really like seeing comments from people. And it's nice talking to sort of friends who've read all my books, and they've all said your writing's getting better. Like we were talking about learning to write, your writing's getting better from book to book. So again, that's really nice as well.
That's great. I mean, how has writing full time sort of changed your life?
I don't know. Well, I used to work in an office, and it's funny actually. Even though I've been in the army and worked in an office a lot, I don't think I'm particularly a team player, and I quite like. And I'm quite introverted as well, and I quite like being on my own and working on my own, because I've got 3 children and quite a very busy life. I don't get lonely, and I don't feel that I need company during my working day. I love the solitude. I love being with my characters. I love being able to create these kind of fascinating worlds. I think it's a real privilege to be able to do this kind of job.
Yeah, that's good. What would you say I'll ask you both sides of it. So first of all, what's your favourite part of the process, of the whole process, would you say?
You know what? I'm not sure, to be honest. I think every part. And my least favourite definitely is incorporating my editor's comments. I find that really hard because you created this thing, and if they say, "Oh, I don't like this," or "I don't,"
You're worried
think
about
this.
breaking it.
Yeah, and if you what they don't really understand, if you change one little bit,
Of course.
particularly in a complex plot, just loads of stuff unravels.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't understand if you touch that. You need to do this, this. So I find that I don't know. I really enjoy all of it actually. I really enjoy the plotting. I find the plotting makes my brain feel as if it's going to explode. I think creating a complex plot is extremely hard. For a 400-page book.
Definitely.
That would keep people guessing, but have enough, clues in there that people would have a chance to be able to guess who the baddie is. I think it's an incredibly complex process, and the plotting makes my brain ache. It really does. But no, I like all of it. I really enjoy all of it, and plotting is different to writing, and then it's different to talking about your book and promoting your book. I really enjoy all of it.
That's good. And with I was just going to say with the editing, and particularly like getting feedback from your editor, how do you approach that? Do you kind of accept everything they say and begrudgingly just get on with it, or do you fight your corner on certain things? How does that work for people that have not had that experience before?
I sort of used to fight my corner, and now I just roll over and capitulate without fighting, because I always lose. I always seem to lose. So
it's not worth the energy.
It's not worth the energy, no, because I always lose. I'll fight my corner if I'll fight my corner from a plot point of view, because often my editor will want to change things that just doesn't work at all from a plot point of view.
Yeah.
So because I do understand the plot better than she does. But to be quite frank, if you're sitting there for a year writing something and you have absolutely no input, and I don't show it to any of my friends or my family because I think it's very hard to get honest feedback from people who know you. Mm-hmm. And so, the first person who sees it is my editor, and she's incredibly experienced, really, really amazingly experienced. Mm-hmm. And again, I think, I'm so lucky to have her looking at my book, and she always improves it. Everything she says is always very, very valuable. So, so no, I don't. I just usually just do what she says because, she's very experienced and always makes it better.
Absolutely. So what's up next? Obviously, you've mentioned you've just finished. You mentioned the next book that you've almost finished, and what's up after that?
So I've just finished Two Little Girls, and then another Jessie Flynn after that. So I need to come up with another plot. So after the end of next week, when I send Two Little Girls off, I'll get all my bits of paper and stick them together and get my Post-it notes and start plotting the next one.
And how does that feel? Because again, I've spoken to other writers and they hate that bit. That the first blank piece of paper, and I'm going to have to do this all over again. Are you kind of quite comfortable in it now, and you're happy? You know that it's going to take X amount of time to sort of come up with the goods, so to speak.
No, I don't think it's funny. Actually, I think it's got harder as I've gone on. I think the problem is, I suppose, because I'm getting better, I'm becoming more judgmental of my own work, and so then I think it becomes harder. Mm-hmm. And I think starting with that blank piece of paper and thinking, I've written 4. Novels that people really, they're getting great reviews on Amazon, and I've written 4 really great novels. I've got to write a 5th really great novel. So I think that is quite stressful when you start with that blank piece of paper and say, what idea can I come up with that that will be really interesting and a bit different, and and then how can I turn that into a complex and interesting plot. So I think that is the hardest part of writing, and probably the most stressful.
So where do you start? I know it's not going to ask you the age-old question that everyone seems to get asked when you go to any Q&As with writers is, where do you get your ideas from? But more like, how do you start that process? So, in a few weeks' time, when you do sit down with that initial piece of paper or whatever, have you got like a little file of ideas? Or I know like Ian Rankin and people like that, they'll often see like newspaper stories that they just think are interesting, and they just stick them in a file for another day, and they'll take them out and think, oh yeah, that was something, and that will spark something, for their character. How do you sort of approach that idea generation, if you like, that first part of the process?
Yes, I mean, in different ways. So obviously, White Crocodile was from my own experience,
sure, yeah.
and something I really wanted to say. Fire Damage was it was based on Fire Damage is about a traumatized little boy. So Jessie is counselling this incredibly deeply disturbed 4-year-old boy who is terrified of a character called the Shadow Man, and he keeps saying this, the Shadow Man came, and he keeps talking about the girl, and he says the girl knows, but there are no girls in his life. So Jessie needs to work out who is the Shadow Man and who is this girl. And that was inspired actually by a study I did when I was doing my degree in psychology about a disturbed little boy who was frightened of the ghost man under the rug. And it's a totally different story, but that nugget of the idea
point, yeah.
was the jumping off point. This little boy who was terrified about this ghost under the rug. So that was Fire Damage, and then Scared to Death was actually it was inspired again by Deep Cut. You've heard of Deep Cut, all the cases around Deep Cut.
Sure, yeah.
So again, it was inspired by something factual. And then the next one, and then Two Little Girls. What was that inspired by? Actually, Two Little Girls is very psychological. You're very much in the mind of one of the mothers of one of the murdered little girls, and I really wanted to write, and she potentially murdered her daughter, or potentially she didn't murder her daughter, and as the reader, you're in this woman's mind who is potentially a murderer, who may or may not be. Obviously, I can't tell you because I will ruin the plot.
Yeah, no spoilers, please.
No spoilers. And I just thought that was a really interesting. I wanted to do something like that, to actually be in the mind of somebody who is potentially a very unreliable narrator, or is potentially telling the truth, is potentially a murderer, is not potentially not.
So sometimes it can be like a background, an issue that forms the kind of background or the themes of the book, and from that you think, right, how can I fashion an idea in this world that I've created that kind of is either based in that world or deals with some of those issues. And then sometimes it is, as you say, it's a factual story or something else, the same as anything else, but that's kind of your jumping off point, and then you extrapolate from there.
Yes, because I think it's quite good to actually, I quite like trying to say something in my books rather than just writing pure fiction. I like to kind of, say something, communicate something factual, something that I really care about in my books, deal with an issue that I really care about, through the medium of a crime novel. And I did that very, very much in White Crocodile. So less, Fire Damage and Scared to Death are sort of more fictional, but they still have very, kind of factual elements, but things I sort of care about. And so Fire Damage deals with, people coming back badly psychologically and physically damaged from fighting in Afghanistan. So Fire Damage contains quite a lot of that, and about, whether we should have, the wars in the Middle East, whether that ever should have happened, and so there's quite a few issues I feel quite strongly about in Fire Damage. So I think a number of places, but I do, as I said, I do like dealing with issues that I feel strongly about in my novels.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you've got an abundance of ideas to go at, and lots of places to go, and lots of novels to write. So just as we kind of round things up, why don't you tell people where they can find more information about you, and obviously your books, your latest books, where they can find you online?
Yeah, well, I have a website, which is katemedina.com, and I've got an author Facebook page, which is Kate Medina Author. So that's probably the best place to go, is my author Facebook page, and also obviously my publisher is HarperCollins, so they will have information about me on their website. But I think Facebook probably, and also I've got a Twitter. So I was just going to
say you're on Twitter.
Yes,
yeah,
I am on Twitter. Yeah, so Kate T Medina is my Twitter handle.
Brilliant. Well, it's been really, really great talking to you. Best of luck with the latest book and the couple that are already in the pipeline coming down.
Thank you very much.
It's really good, and it's been great having you on. Thanks a million.
It was a pleasure. Really nice to talk to you, Wayne. Okay, take care.
There you go, the talented and fascinating Kate Medina, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. What did you think to the show? If you like it, let me know. If you don't, well, also let me know. And you could do that in the comments on the website, on our Facebook page, or on Twitter at JU Podcast. If you do enjoy the show, I would be eternally grateful if you can take 30 seconds to leave me a quick rating and review on iTunes, as that's how more people can find the show, and it'll also mean I can continue to attract great guests and provide more content. So that wraps things up for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website, and that next week we will have Kate's bonus epilogue quick listen episode where we chatted about writing strong female characters, so do tune in for that. Thanks for listening again this week. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up